Hey, welcome back to Dan's Chess Lounge, everyone. Today in round 6, we have Wesley So against Levon Aronian. Now, Wesley So had a very difficult start to the candidates tournament. He lost 2 games back to back, and then Levon Aronian has had an emotional roller coaster. This has been a very, very emotionally difficult tournament for him. First he got immortalized by Vladimir Kramnik in that Berlin game where Kramnik played Rook G8 on him and just launched one of the most dangerous attacks that's been seen on the chessboard. And then after that, a few days later, he lost to not lost, but he drew to Alexander Grischuk after blundering the queen captures bishop on c8. It was just a complete oversight, a blunder. So there's been a lot of roller coasters for Aronian, and then Wesley So had the bad start. Today they're facing off against each other in round 6. Let's see what transpired over the board. So played e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. We have our Ruy Lopez, otherwise known as the Spanish game. White wants to eliminate the knight on c6 and then snag that pawn on e5. a6 is the Morphy's defense, named after Paul Morphy. Bishop a4, knight f6, which attacks the pawn on e4. White's not worried about it because he can always get it back after he plays rook e1, bishop e7, developing rook e1, b5, striking out on the queen side there, and also preventing that bishop from capturing on c6 now. Castles, a4 here, this is the anti-marshal. It stops black from playing in the center because he has to deal with the problems that's on the wing here. So if A takes B right now, then you would just have A takes B, and then white would snap off this rook here on A8. So black has to address this position here and these complications. So in the game, B4 was played here just to push. The main line is bishop b7 though. The problem with bishop b7 is that the bishop kind of gets stuck in this inactive position right here, especially after black plays d6 here. It can be kind of an inactive piece. So instead, Aronian decided to play b4. And then here, at some point, Aronian would like to play knight a5 and then c5 here and expand on the wing. So a5 was played by So. It's not the main move here, but it does prevent black from playing a knight a5 here, and it also makes sure that black cannot connect his pawns, the 2 pawns here. So d6 was played, d3, bishop e6, bishops come off the board, and even though black's pawn structure is destroyed at this point, he does get some benefits though. He's got the semi-open f file where his rook is already lined up there, and this pawn here on e6 does help out in the center whenever black wants to play d5. So it kind of adds support to the center, this pawn. Knight b d2, rook b8. The rook is getting ready to help out with attacking this pawn here. Knight b3. This is a little bit of an awkward move here, but it serves a purpose, which is to help protect this pawn here on a5 along with the rook. Queen c8. Now you have h3. This here is a prophylactic move which keeps the knight out of that g4 square. Knight d8. Black is going to continue with his plan on the queen side, C5 will be coming very soon. Bishop E3, C5, knight B D2, and now you have knight C6. And Black wants to go ahead and play his rook down to B5 and try to attack this pawn here. And right here, I just want to say that both players, they have done very well out of the opening. There's no huge tactical shots going on right now. Both of the players have an idea and a plan that they would like to implement. It's a pretty even game at this point. No one is actually winning at this point. It's pretty even. Both players are playing well. So now it's going to be a battle to see whose plans is better. C3, rook B5, D4, here's your central strike. E takes D, C takes D. Knight grabs that pawn on A5. D takes C, D takes C, and rook A2. So white has sacked a pawn here, but his position is fine. The question is going to be, is he going to have enough compensation for that pawn that he sacked? What is the compensation for that pawn that he sacked? Do you guys think he has enough compensation for it? Is his pieces active enough for that pawn? We'll see. Let's see what happens in the game. Queen B7. That hits the pawn on E4 with the knight. B3. Now Black can capture the pawn on E4 if he would like to. Let's see what happens if he does. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes. Knight. Queen takes. But now you have bishop C5. And that discovery there is on the queen. The rook is hitting the queen. The bishop is hitting the bishop here. So queen goes back to B7. Bishop takes. Queen takes. And at the end of that variation there, the game is still relatively even. Black is still up that pawn, but Black's knight here is not good. Everyone's heard the saying about a knight on the rim is dim. And if the knight ever moves, then this pawn here is going to get snapped off. So it's still anyone's game after this variation. So Black could have taken that pawn on E4. Excuse me. Yeah, on E4. But Aronian did not go for that. Instead, he played King H8. He just wanted to play a prophylactic move to make his king a little bit safer for when the fireworks start. Queen C2. Protects the pawn. Knight D7. Now you have rook E-A1. It hits the knight here. The knight is not defended enough. So you have bishop D8. Now that bishop protects the knight along with the rook. Knight C4 is a third attacker on that knight. So then you have knight captures knight. Queen captures. Now this pawn is being hit right here. Bishop F6. Even though the pawn is hanging, the bishop is now hitting the rook. So the rook moves to D1. Queen goes to C6. Protects. Now you have rook A D2. Now you have, again, two attackers hitting the knight. Knight goes to B6, hits the queen. Queen drops back to C2. And at the end of this, the knight was able to move off of the A5 square, so that's a plus. Black is also a pawn up still, so that's another plus for Black. So does White have any compensation for that sacked pawn? I ask you guys. One thing that White does have is he has this open D file that he has total control of with his rooks. So that is a big, big plus. Is it compensation though? We'll see. Queen C7, E5. Now, should Black accept another pawn? What happens if he does? Bishop takes pawn. But now you have this great move here, knight g5, where the queen is threatening checkmate on h7. So pawn push g6 stops that. Then you have knight takes e6, which forks the rook here and the queen. Queen goes e7. Knight snaps off that rook. And this is just a one game for white because black can't even recapture the knight there on f8 because then you would have rook to d8 pinning the queen to the king. And also this pawn here on c5 is hanging as well with the queen and bishop on it. So he's going to lose even more material. So this is just winning for white. So obviously black cannot take that pawn on e5. So he plays bishop e7 instead. Now here, this is a really interesting move here. Knight d4. The knight can't be captured because it's pinned. The pawn is pinned to the queen here. So the knight can't be captured. So then you have rook c8. Now the knight snaps off that pawn on e6. Here's the queen. Queen takes on e5. And now you have a really interesting continuation that's available for white if Wesley So would find it. It's sort of a computer variation though. It's very, very hard to spot. I asked you guys, what would you play here for white? What is the best continuation right here for white? I'm going to go ahead and play it. It would have been rook d6. Yes, it's an unbelievable move. Rook d6. Going right into the eye of the attack. So right where the bishop is attacking. Bishop takes the rook. Now black is threatening queen h2. But now you have this incredible move, knight g5, which threatens queen takes h7 checkmate. So in order to stop that, you have queen h2, king moves over, and g6. But now white can snap off that bishop there. Rook takes bishop on d6. And if queen takes d6, now you have knight f7 forking the king and queen. So you have queen h1 check, king goes to e2, and white is winning big time at this point here because black's king is just super exposed and white's pieces are active as well. So this will be winning for white. Black might continue with queen to a1 so it can keep an eye and control this long diagonal here to the king. But after queen d2, white is threatening to play rook up to d8 check, and then it's going to be lights out for black. Black is not going to be able to survive this attack with the knight and bishop being in the game and the queen on the back rank d8. So, but that's like a computer variation though that is very hard to find for human beings, especially over the board like that. So I can't really fault Wesley for not finding this variation. Let's go back and see what he actually decided to play in the game. It wasn't rook d6. Instead, he played knight f4, which is still a good move there. Rook f8, getting ready to sack the rook here. Sack the rook here for the knight and bishop. So now you have rook e2, which is x-raying that queen. Queen c3. Aronian would like to exchange queens at this point here and use his extra pawn to hopefully win the endgame. Queen b1. Wesley says, no thank you very much. I have an attack that I would like to carry out. Queen f6. Now you have bishop c1. The idea is to go bishop b2 and then attack on that long diagonal. c4. Aronian is trying to put his extra pawn to good use. B takes c. Knight takes c4. And now Aronian's position doesn't look that bad from the outside or from far away. He's got these two pawns here. They're going to just march up the board, right? I mean, that's his plan. He's going to march these pawns all the way down and promote. You know, I call past pawns baby queens. He's going to make those baby queens there with these pawns. Unfortunately, Wesley So has other plans. He's about to wreak havoc on Aronian's position. Starting now, rook e6 hits the queen and also attacks that pawn on a6. The queen goes to g5. And now, what would you do here, guys? What would you play? Wesley So decided to play knight g6 check. And you see the discovery here. The bishop is attacking the queen here. So Aronian snaps off the knight. Rook takes queen. Pawn takes rook. Now queen e4 forks the knight and the bishop and the pawn. Bishop goes to f6. And the queen snaps off the knight. b3 is played. And here's Aronian's thinking, an idea. He's thinking, okay, if I had to give up my queen there, then my position is still not that bad. Because I did get two pieces for the queen. And also, I have these two outside passed pawns on the A and B file. My bishop is covering this b2 square for the pawn. And I have the two rooks that's going to double up on the B file. So that's Aronian's idea. He's thinking that he has enough material and his position is well enough to where he has some chances still. And he does have some chances still. By no means should he give up or anything at this point. So bishop a3 is played. It hits the rook on f8. Rook goes to b8. Rook b1. Wesley is making sure that the pawn doesn't have any chance of promoting on b1. b2 is played. Now you have h4. Rook a5, which hits the bishop. And the bishop cannot move here because if the bishop moves, then the rook is going to drop down to a1 here. And it's going to be a disaster for white. So the bishop is stuck right there temporarily. Queen d3 defends it. Now you have rook d8 hitting the queen. Queen goes to b3. Rook c8. Queen b7 hits the rook. Rook goes to d8. And queen b3. So at this point here, the players are just shuffling their pieces around. Wesley doesn't really have an idea of how to win just quite yet. But he finds an idea though. He finds an idea right now. Queen b4. This hits the rook here. And the rook goes to b5. Now Wesley goes to the queen g4. This forks the pawn here on g6. And it also forks the rook there on c8. Rook goes to c3, hits the bishop. Bishop snaps off the pawn. Rook takes, rook takes. Rook c1 check with a discovery on the rook here. Bishop captures that rook. And then the queen captures the pawn on g6. So at the end of that variation there, this was Wesley's plan all along from the whole queen g4. Once he figured it out, at the end of that variation there, black won a bishop and a rook, while white won two pawns and a rook. So the result is a winning endgame for white because of these connected pawns right here. They're going to be very hard to stop going up the board. So even though Wesley might have lost that combination and he lost that exchange there, he didn't get as much as black got out of that exchange, it still resulted in a winning endgame. So that was very clever. I don't know for sure if that was his idea 100%, but if it was, that was very, very clever to go into a losing exchange there, but come out with the winning endgame. So Rook A1 was played, G4, and there goes the pawns. Charge forward. A5, Queen H5 check, King G8. Queen hits the bishop. Bishop goes to A3. And now if the queen snaps off that pawn there on A5, then that would be a big blunder due to Bishop D6 check. And then the rook would snap off the white queen. That would lose. That would be horrible, devastating. So instead of that, you had Queen E5, Rook D1. Now that the rook has moved off of that A file, now Wesley can go ahead and try to win this pawn on A5. So Queen E6, King H7, Queen E4, King H8, and now with Queen A8, Wesley is able to win the pawn here on A5, and this just shows the domination and the power of a queen compared to the other pieces on the board, especially when it's an open position and the queen can really travel all around the board. The queen is very, very dominant. So King H7, Queen takes A5, Bishop D6, check, King goes to G2, Rook D4 hits the pawn, but the Queen comes over to save it, King H8, Queen H5 check, King G8, and G5. The pawns must roll forward. Charge on. King F8, Queen G6, Bishop E7, Queen F5, check. King goes to E8, King H3. You see that the white is just slowly improving their position, moving the pawns forward, moving the king forward. Rook D6, Queen H7, which threatens the pawn there. So the king goes back to F7, but then you have F4. And that's White's plan. He's just going to continue to push his pawns up the board. Rook D4 hits the pawn. King F5, check, and it also protects the pawn on F4. King goes back to E8. And again, this is a pretty simple plan for White. White is just going to use his queen and king to escort the pawns up the board. Black's rook and bishop can't really attack the white king too much and get too separated from the king because there's so many forks that white can do. So black has to stay relatively close. The black pieces have to stay relatively close to the king and to be protected. Queen E5 pins the bishop and hits the rook and the pawn here. Rook goes to B4. King G4, just improve the position. King F8, Queen F5, King E8, Queen E6, Rook D4. And now with Queen E5, Aronian resigned because the rook is under attack here and the pawn is too. So once the rook moves out the way, Wesley So will snap off this pawn on G7, and then the H pawn will roll right on up the board along with the other pawns. So there is nothing that black can do to stop it. So I would like to say that there was some, not controversy, but there was some chatter if Aronian should have resigned like 15 moves ago because the writing was on the wall. and there was some wondering about if he was being disrespectful. And I say that he wasn't. He was just trying to win or trying to find a way to save the game. I mean, it's very difficult losing, especially for these top players. They don't lose very often. These super GMs, usually they're on the winning side of things. So he was trying to, face reality pretty much, and going through the motions and trying to collect his thoughts really before he got into the press conference. So I don't think it was disrespectful. You guys let me know. Should he resign 15 or 20 moves ago when the writing was on the wall? Or was he all right and justified and playing on? So tomorrow is a rest day. And also Shaq Mamadiyarov won today. So he ties Fabiano Caruana at the top. So I hope you guys enjoyed the game. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. I'll see you guys in round 7.